Welcome to Function-Specific Training. This section provides basic training, and to assure full compliance with federal regulations, each employer must assure function-specific training of each employee as it relates to their particular operation. In this section, we'll cover various areas that are specifically applicable to the functions an employee performs related to the transportation of hazardous materials, including preparing and/or effectively reading shipping papers, properly marking and labeling hazardous material, placarding, packaging, carrier requirements. The term shipping paper, as used by the transportation industry, means the piece of paper or document used for billing, accountability, and other day-to-day activities of transporting hazardous materials. Shipping papers must be retained for 375 days by the offeror and the carrier. All shipping papers must accurately describe and identify hazardous material in this HMT sequence, known as the basic description. The proper shipping name, the hazard class or division, the identification number, packing group, if any is assigned, and the total quantity. Shipping papers must also include total quantity and unit of measure, any required additional entries, shipper certification, emergency contact telephone number. An emergency response telephone number must be entered on the shipping paper immediately after each hazardous material description, or if the telephone number applies to all hazardous materials, it must be listed on the shipping paper but entered only once in a clearly visible location and with an indication that the number is for emergency response information. Remember, all of the basic information can be found in the HMT. The proper shipping name is found in column 2. The hazards class or division is located in column 3. The ID number is located in column 4. And the packaging group is located in column 5. A hazardous material and non-hazardous material may be placed on the same shipping paper. However, the hazardous material entries must be entered first, or entered in a color that clearly contrasts with any description of a material not subject to the regulations. Highlighting is authorized on reproduced copies of a shipping paper, or the hazardous materials may be identified by an X in a column captioned HM. The letters RQ for reportable quantity may also be entered in this column to identify a hazardous substance. The last shipping paper entry is the certification that the hazardous materials are properly offered for transportation according to the HMR. The shipper must enter the selected certification on the shipping paper and sign it manually or by typewriter or by other electronic means. As a carrier, you are responsible to verify the information on the shipping paper. If the paperwork is not correct or the packages are not intact, do not accept the shipment. Shipments that comply with the HMR make transportation of hazardous materials safer for everyone, including you. A shipping paper must accurately communicate the hazards of the material in the packages and on the transport vehicle. Keep in mind that all shipping paper entries must be legible and printed in English. No unauthorized abbreviations are permitted. And while a shipping document may have more than one page, each page must be numbered consecutively, and the first page must specify the total number of pages. The shipping description must be shown before and/or after the basic description. The total quantity must include the unit of measurement, such as liters, gallons, kilograms, or pounds. Quantity can be shown as gross or net. The total quantity, type of packaging, and destination mark may be entered in any appropriate manner before or after the basic description. Abbreviations for the total quantity may be used on the shipping paper. You may abbreviate the type of package and/or unit of measurement. For example, carton, box, drum, kilogram, liters. Place the total quantity before and or after the basic description. Here's an example. 10 cartons, paint 3, UN 1263, PG Roman numeral 2, 225 kilograms. The basic description must be shown in the HMT sequence: proper shipping name, hazard class or division, ID number, and PG. If a hazardous material is described on a shipping paper by one of the NOS proper shipping names listed in the technical name, they must be shown in parentheses in association with the NOS proper shipping name. The word contains also may be used with the technical name. Let's look up the proper shipping name: corrosive liquids NOS UN 1760. The NOS description does not name the hazardous constituent. In this case, the hazardous constituent is caprylyl chloride. Caprylyl chloride is not listed by name in the HMT, but meets the definition of a corrosive material. Therefore, the technical name must be added in parentheses in association with the basic description. In other words, add the technical name following the proper shipping name or after the basic description. For example, corrosive liquids, NOS, caprylyl chloride, 8, UN 1760, PG2, 20 gallons, in that order. If the material meets the definition of a poison or toxic, and the fact that the material is a poison is not indicated by the proper shipping name or hazard class, the word poison or toxic must be entered on the shipping paper in association with the shipping description. Let's look up the shipping name allyl chloride in the HMT. Allyl chloride is a proper shipping name. Look in column 3. The hazard class is 3, flammable liquid. Now look in column 6. The material is required to be labeled flammable liquid and poison or toxic. This means that the secondary class is poison or toxic. The fact that this material is a poison or toxic is not indicated by the proper shipping name or by the hazard class. Therefore, you must write the word poison or toxic on the shipping paper in association with the shipping description. For a material meeting the poisonous or toxic by inhalation criteria, the words poison inhalation hazard or toxic inhalation hazard and the appropriate hazard zone, Zone A, Zone B, Zone C, or Zone D for gases, or Zone A or Zone B for liquids, must be on the shipping paper. Enter poison inhalation hazard or toxic inhalation hazard and the appropriate hazard zone, A, B, C, or D, in association with the shipping description. Marking and labeling. Marking and labeling of hazardous materials packages is required by the U.S. Department of Transportation. The shipper must mark each package, freight container, and transport vehicle which contains hazardous materials in accordance with the applicable regulations. According to the HMR, the term marking refers to the required information on an outer package containing hazardous materials and includes a proper shipping name, ID number, specifications or UN marks, plus any required information, instructions, and/or cautions. If required, the technical names must be marked on the packages when the hazardous material is a mixture or solution of 2 or more hazardous materials. Packages containing only limited quantity or ORMD materials are not required to have the ID number marked on the package when not packed with other hazardous materials. Inhalation hazard must be marked on any package containing material that meets the criteria of a poison inhalation hazard or toxic inhalation hazard. The inhalation hazard marking must appear in association with the labels or placards and may be marked on either the packages or on the label or placard. In addition to marking, labels are applied to the outside of shipping containers. Labels, which must be at least 3.9 inches on each side, identify the primary and subsidiary hazards specific to materials. Unless otherwise provided, anyone offering a package, overpack, or freight container of hazardous material for transportation must label it. Column 6 of the HMT contains a listing of the label codes for each hazardous material associated with the proper shipping name and hazard class. The initial stop in determining appropriate labeling requirements is to check column 6 of the HMT for any required labels. More than one label may be necessary in some instances. For example, when you look up allyl chloride in the HMT, column 6 requires 2 labels to be affixed: flammable and poison or toxic. Placards. Placards are placed on bulk packagings, freight containers, transport vehicles, and rail cars to alert the public of the potential dangers of the product being transported and to guide emergency responders in the event of an accident or accidental release. Placards must clearly communicate the hazard of the material being transported. This is crucial in an emergency situation. Therefore, the required placards must have no visual competition. Placards must be displayed on each end and each side of a bulk packaging, freight container, unit load device, transport vehicle, and rail car containing any quantity of a hazardous material unless the HMR says otherwise. There are 2 placarding tables. Do not confuse these tables with the hazardous materials table or HMT. When determining which placards must be used and what options are available, both placarding tables must be considered. It is important to keep the 2 placarding tables separate when determining placarding requirements. Placarding Table 1 is straightforward. Any quantity of any hazardous material listed in Table 1 requires placarding. Placarding Table 2 lists the remainder of the hazardous material classes that require placards. However, Table 2 materials require placarding only when the aggregate gross weight of all hazardous materials on the transport vehicle or in the freight container is 1,001 pounds or more. Transport vehicles and freight containers transporting less than 1,001 pounds aggregate gross weight of Table 2 materials may be placarded. Placards are not required, however. Additional placarding exceptions are provided in the HMR. When determining placarding requirements, it is not necessary to include the weight of any non-bulk packaging that contains only residue of a Table 2 hazardous material. When a shipper offers hazardous materials to a carrier for highway transportation, the shipper must also offer the required placards, unless the carrier's vehicle is already properly placarded for the materials. The motor carrier may not transport the hazardous materials unless the proper placards are affixed to the vehicle. A different approach is provided for placarding a hazardous material shipment offered in a bulk package. The person offering the hazardous material for transport must affix the required placards before the shipment is offered. Placarding is the joint responsibility of the shipper and the carrier. Those who offer, load, and/or transport hazardous materials must comply with the placarding regulations. If the required placard is missing or damaged, no matter what the reason, the shipment must not be transported. If you are a shipper, make sure you offer or affix the required placards for the materials before you ship them. If you are a carrier, know what you are accepting for transportation. If the placards are not correct, do not accept the shipment. Now let's review Section 3. Motor carriers of hazardous material are subject to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, as well as various parts of the Code of Federal Regulation. No person may offer or accept a hazardous material for transportation and commerce unless that person is registered, if required, and the hazardous material is properly classed, described, packaged, marked, labeled, and in proper condition for shipment in accordance with the HMR. Both carriers and shippers are responsible to ensure their employees are properly trained as required by the HMR. A Haz-Mat employee is anyone employed by a Haz-Mat employer who during the course of employment directly affects hazardous material transportation safety. Before any Haz-Mat employee performs a function subject to the HMR, that person, unless exempted, must be provided initial training in the performance of that function. Each hazardous material employee must also be periodically retrained at least every 3 years. Shipping papers must accompany all hazardous material shipments, unless an authorized exception is provided, and an initial motor carrier may not accept a hazardous material unless the shipping paper includes a properly completed shipper's certification. It is the responsibility of every motor carrier and driver to make sure that the shipping papers are readily available and accessible in case of an inspection or incident. Shipping papers must also be retained for 375 days by the offerer and the carrier. That's the end of Lesson 3, Function-Specific Training. At this time, you should stop the video and take Test 3. Hello and welcome to Lesson 4, Driver Training. In this module, you will learn about the highway carrier requirements that generally addresses the Hazardous Materials Regulations, Part 177, Carriage by Public Highway, and Part 397, Transportation of Hazardous Materials Driving and Parking Rules. In this section, you will learn a driver's duties and responsibilities for the safe transportation on highways, the requirements for loading and unloading hazardous material, and visual identification of cargo tankers. Let's get started with the rules of transporting hazardous materials. Number 1. Cargo securement. To protect against shifting and falling cargo, load should be properly distributed and adequately secured as described in Section 393 of the Code of Federal Regulation. In addition, the requirements for hazardous material securement can be found in Section 177.834, subparentheses A. Number 2. Tire inspection. Tire inspection should be done at the beginning and end of every trip. Number 3. Railroad crossings. When approaching a rail crossing, the driver must stop and check for oncoming trains. The requirement specifies that the vehicle must stop no closer than 15 feet from the tracks and no further than 50 feet away. Also, never change gears while crossing tracks. Number 4. Smoking. While transporting explosives, oxidizers, or flammables, smoking is prohibited within 25 feet of the vehicle. Number 5. Open flame or fire. Never operate or park a vehicle within 300 feet of a fire or open flame. Number 6. Written route plan. While transporting explosives, a written route plan is mandatory and a copy must accompany the shipping papers. Number 7. Private property. Do not operate a vehicle or park on private property without the consent of the owner or the person in charge of that property. Number 8. Parking restrictions. Parking is prohibited within 300 feet of a bridge, automobile parking garage, or tunnel. Motor carriers transporting hazardous material through public tunnels must comply with state statutes and municipal ordinances. Number 9. Avoid areas where large numbers of people gather. Number 10. The vehicle engine must be off and the driver must be in attendance during refueling. Hazardous material shipments offered by or co-signed to the U.S. Department of Defense must be packaged in containers that meet HMR requirements or are of equal or greater strength and efficiency as required by DoD regulations. Hazardous materials sold by DoD in packagings not marking in accordance with the HMR may be shipped from DoD installations. However, DoD must certify in writing that those packagings equal or exceed HMR requirements. Despite all safety efforts, accidents or incidents do occur. When a hazardous material is involved in a transportation incident, a report may be required. Reportable incidents may occur when the material is in transportation, being loaded, unloaded, or in temporary storage. Reporting requirements are the responsibility of the carrier. A motor carrier in possession of a misdirected or lost hazardous material shipment, other than explosives, must promptly send the shipment to its destination if known. However, the shipment must be inspected before being reshipped to determine that it is in proper condition for transportation. If a package of hazardous material is not labeled and the exact content classification is unknown, the carrier must apply the flammable liquid label. Motor carriers must maintain an adequate supply of hazardous material warning labels to replace lost or destroyed labels. Motor carriers must replace lost or destroyed labels based on shipping paper information. Unless an authorized exception is provided, all hazardous material shipments must be accompanied by a shipping paper. It is the responsibility of every motor carrier and driver to make sure that the shipping papers are readily available and recognizable in the case of an accident or inspection. If a load requires placards, carriers should also provide on board each truck a copy of its current certificate of registration issued by the RSPA or another document bearing the registration number identified as the U.S. DOT Haz-Mat registration number. Drivers and motor carriers must clearly distinguish shipping papers or hazardous material shipments from all other papers. This can be accomplished by tabbing or placing these shipping papers first. When the driver is at the motor vehicle's control, the shipping papers must be within the driver's immediate reach while restrained by lap belt. The shipping paper must be visible to a person entering the driver's compartment or in a holder mounted on the inside of the driver's side door. When the driver is not at the vehicle controls, the shipping paper must be in a holder mounted to the inside of the driver's side door or on the driver's seat. In addition, drivers should carry the North American Emergency Response Guide book, the Hazardous Materials Pocket Guide, the Hazardous Materials Incident Kit, as well as an accident reporting kit, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, and a copy of insurance. Proper documentation for the transportation of hazardous materials is important to the driver. These records are subject to inspection by U.S. DOT representatives. U.S. DOT representatives have the right to inspect all motor carrier records, equipment, packaging and containers, and any entity that may affect the safe transportation of hazardous materials. General loading and unloading requirements. Remember, it is the carrier's primary responsibility for loading, storage, and transportation compliance. The driver must be awake and present during loading and unloading. It is also the driver's responsibility to be aware of and ensure that the vehicle is secure by setting handbrakes and chocking wheels, that prohibited loading combinations are in compliance, that container safeguards are met for securing cargo against movement during transit, that no tools are used that could puncture or damage any package or container, that smoking is prohibited, that all efforts are made to keep fire or open flame away from the hazardous materials, and that no one tampers with the hazardous materials freight between its point of origin and build destination. Motor carriers must comply with the HMR and train employees in the prescribed regulations. Additional specific training is required for drivers operating a cargo tank, a vehicle with a portable tank with a capacity of 1,000 gallons or more, and motor vehicles carrying Class 7 radioactive material that require placards. Visual identification of cargo tanks. There are 6 basic types of cargo tank trailers: the MC306, the MC307, the MC312, the MC331, and the MC338, the tube trailer, and the vacuum-loaded tank. The MC306 is used primarily for the transportation of fuels. It is a large, ovular tank typically made of single-shell aluminum construction. Typical capacity is 9,000 gallons. The MC307 is used for flammable and combustible liquids, mild corrosives, and most liquid chemicals. It is a round tank that has the capacity of 6,000 to 7,000 gallons. The MC312 is even smaller than the 307 and is used typically to transport corrosive materials. The MC-312 has a typical capacity of 5 to 6,000 gallons. The MC-331 is a high-pressure gas cargo tank. It has a circular cross-section with rounded ends or heads. It typically transports LP gases and anhydrous ammonia. Capacities range from 2,500 to 11,000 gallons depending on the size. The MC-338 is used for transportation of cryogenic liquids, for instance, liquid nitrogen and liquid carbon dioxide. It is a well-insulated double-shelled tank with a thermos bottle design. And finally, the tube trailer or compressed gas trailer. The compressed gas trailer is comprised of tubes manifolded together at the front and the back. This type typically transports gases like oxygen, nitrogen, and hydrogen. Cargo tanks require various types and rates of inspections depending on the type. External visual inspections are to be completed every 6 to 12 months. Internal visual inspections are to be done every 1 to 5 years. For corrosive trailers, a lining inspection must be done every year. Tanks are also subject to leakage, pressure, and thickness testing. Leakage testing must be conducted every 1 to 2 years. Pressure testing should be done every 1 to 5 years, and thickness testing of unlined tanks transporting corrosive materials must be tested every 2 years. For a complete chart of required testing, refer to Section 180.407C of the Code of Federal Regulation. Inspection certifications are posted on the trailer and should be visible. Well, that ends Section 4 on driver requirements. Please stop the video now and take Test 4. After completing Test 4, proceed with the DOT Security Awareness CD-ROM training.